Tom Silva's journey into the world of construction didn't begin under studio lights or in front of an adoring audience. It started in the quiet, sawdust-filled corners of Lexington, Massachusetts, long before anyone would ever think to call him America's most trusted home improvement expert. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood where the sounds of hammers and the scent of freshly cut wood was simply part of daily life. For young Tom, building wasn't a career choice, it was the air he breathed. His father, a skilled builder in his own right, didn't send Tom to trade school or hand him a textbook. Instead, he gave him a tool belt and brought him along to job sites. From an early age, Tom watched, listened, and absorbed not just the mechanics of construction, but the philosophy behind it. Why reinforce that beam? Why does this particular joint matter? Why spend hours perfecting something that no one will ever see? The answers, passed quietly from father to son on dusty job sites, became the foundation of everything Tom would later stand for. Doing things right the first time wasn't just a professional standard, it was a deeply personal creed. Growing up surrounded by Lexington's colonial architecture and historic buildings gave Tom something most people never get, a living classroom. He didn't just see houses, he saw stories etched into every beam and brick. These structures weren't simply places to live, they were testaments to craftsmanship, proof that work done with care and integrity could outlast generations. That early sense of reverence for quality work never left him. It became the invisible thread connecting everything he would go on to build, restore, and teach throughout his remarkable career. As Tom grew older, he and his brother Richard took the values their father had instilled in them and turned it into something tangible. Silva Brothers Construction was born, a family-run business rooted in old-school principles but fully prepared to take on the challenges of modern renovation. Whether the project was a modest kitchen remodel or a sprawling historical restoration, Tom approached every job with the same meticulous care he'd learned as a boy. Word spread quickly throughout Massachusetts. If you wanted it done properly, you called the Silvas. That reputation for top-tier craftsmanship would eventually open a door Tom never even knew he was standing in front of. The story of how Tom ended up on television is almost too good to be true. Back in the mid-1980s, he was simply doing what he always did, running his construction business, taking on jobs, and staying far away from anything resembling a camera. Then came an unexpected encounter with his neighbor, a television producer named Russell Morash. When Morash first suggested that Tom appear on television, Tom turned him down without a second thought. He was too busy, plain and simple. He had a thriving business to run and no interest in swapping his tool belt for a microphone. But Morash wasn't easily discouraged. He had already seen Tom's work firsthand. Silva Brothers Construction had built the set for his PBS show The Victory Garden, and he believed Tom's skill and authenticity deserved a wider audience. The real turning point came not through a formal audition or a persuasive pitch meeting, but through something far more spontaneous. Morash showed up unannounced at one of Tom's job sites with a camera crew, walked straight up to him, clipped a microphone onto his shirt, and that was that. No script, no rehearsal, just Tom, his tools, and everything he knew. By 1986, he had officially joined the cast of This Old House as the show's general contractor, and 2 years later, Silva Brothers Construction became the program's official contracting firm. What followed was one of the most remarkable careers in the history of home improvement television. Tom tackled projects that would make most contractors quietly back out of the room. There was the 1887 Nantucket House, a renovation that evolved into something closer to a complete rebuild. Then came the 1906 Arts and Crafts Church, a literal place of worship, that the team transformed into a family home. Perhaps most jaw-dropping of all was the 1721 farmhouse that had tilted backward by a full 8 inches due to a rutted sill. Fixing that without tearing the entire structure down required a level of expertise and creative problem-solving that few people in the trade could match. And then there was the Manchester by the Sea project, which Tom himself described as way too big for the time allotted. It was supposed to take 18 months. They finished it in 10. But Tom's contribution to This Old House was never just about the builds themselves. Over time, he became something far more valuable, an educator. He had a rare gift for taking complex construction challenges and breaking them down into clear, digestible steps that viewers at home could actually understand and apply. Millions of people tuned in not just to watch the transformations unfold, but to learn from Tom specifically, Because he made even the most technical subject feel approachable and human. He once admitted that if he hadn't become a contractor, he probably would have been a teacher. In many ways, that's precisely what he became. His passion for education extended well beyond the television screen. Tom became deeply involved in Generation Next, an initiative launched by this old house in 2016 aimed at inspiring young people to consider careers in the skilled trades. At a time when America faces a significant shortage of workers in essential fields, Tom became one of the loudest and most credible voices reminding the country that there are over 5 million jobs waiting to be filled, not because the work isn't there, but because there aren't enough skilled people to do it. For Tom, handing a young person a tape measure and watching their eyes light up wasn't a metaphor. It was a mission. Behind the warm smile and the confident on-camera presence, however, there was a more complicated story quietly unfolding. Tom has since opened up about the behind-the-scenes tensions that nearly cost him his role on the show on more than one occasion. In the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, he found himself repeatedly at odds with producers over the show's direction. For Tom, the conflicts weren't petty disagreements about camera angles or segment lengths. They cut to the very core of what the program was supposed to represent. He believed this old house should always put the craft first: real materials, real problems, real solutions. When producers began compressing construction timelines to suit filming schedules, Tom felt the show was being dishonest with its audience. Cutting corners, even for the camera, felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. Things came to a head when Tom gave the producers a direct ultimatum: either give him more control over how the construction work was portrayed on screen, or he would walk away. It wasn't a bluff, it was a man drawing a line to protect his integrity. The producers, recognizing just how much of the show's credibility rested on Tom's authenticity, agreed to give him greater input. The crisis was averted, but it wasn't the last one. In 2004, the pressures mounted again, and this time Tom went so far as to begin drafting a resignation letter. He talked it over with his family, weighed his options carefully, and genuinely considered stepping away for good. Once again, producers responded by offering him something more valuable than a raise. They offered him autonomy. They guaranteed his work would not be altered for the sake of runtime and gave him greater authority on job sites. The letter was never sent. Then came the 2010s, and with them, a new kind of pressure. Television itself was changing. Streaming platforms were exploding in popularity, audiences were shifting, and producers began floating the idea of reducing Tom's screen time to make way for younger, trendier faces. For Tom, this wasn't simply a question of ego or screen presence. He saw the fundamental character of the show, its depth, its reliability, its commitment to teaching viewers the real process, being threatened. He pushed back firmly, reminding everyone involved that the audience didn't tune in for flash. They tuned in for wisdom, for the kind of hard-won, hands-on knowledge that only comes from decades of actual experience. Fans and longtime staff rallied behind him. The message that emerged was impossible to ignore. Tom Silva wasn't just part of this old house. He was its foundation. Then, in 2018, something happened that shook him more deeply than any production disagreement ever could. Austin Wilson, a young crew member whom Tom had personally mentored, passed away suddenly during a filming season. For Tom, this was not a professional setback. It was a personal devastation. People close to him described how profoundly the loss affected him. He grew quieter on set, withdrew from conversations he would normally lead, and for the first time in his career, he began seriously questioning whether it was time to step away. Here was a man who had spent his entire life building and fixing things, suddenly confronted with something he simply could not repair. What helped pull him through was unexpected. Austin's own family reached out and told Tom how much their son had admired him, not just as a craftsman, but as a person and a mentor. Their words, offered in grief and generosity, gave Tom something to hold on to. Slowly and quietly, he found his footing again. The thought of retiring began to feel less like relief and more like surrender. He still had something to give. Walking away would mean abandoning the very people and the craft that had carried him through every chapter of his life. In early 2025, Tom, now 77 years old, sat down with the familiar faces of the production team and confirmed what many had hoped but weren't entirely sure they'd hear. He had no plans to retire. He would continue as lead contractor and technical consultant for upcoming seasons, with major projects already underway in West Ford and Ridgewood. There was a steadiness in his voice, the kind that only comes from someone who has weathered real storms and found genuine purpose on the other side of them. His legacy, at this point, stretches far beyond anything that can be measured in square footage or renovation budgets. His mentorship of his nephew Charlie Silva, now president of Silva Brothers Construction, is one example of how deliberately he has worked to ensure that what is built doesn't disappear when he eventually does step back. His investment in professionals like finishing painter Mauro Enrique, landscape designer Jen Nevada, and electrical expert Heath Eastman reflects a man who understands that craftsmanship is not a solo endeavor, it's a relay race, and someone has to be willing to pass the baton with both hands. Tom's philosophy about progress is equally telling. He has never been the type to chase every new tool or trend. He is measured and thoughtful, preferring time-tested techniques while remaining open to technology that genuinely improves the work without compromising its soul. Progress, in his view, should come in steady, purposeful steps, not flashy leaps driven by novelty or convenience. In a world increasingly obsessed with shortcuts and instant results, there is something quietly radical about a man who still believes that the only way to do something is to do it right. In the end, Tom Silva's story is about far more than houses. It is about values passed from one generation to the next. It is about the courage to stand firm when integrity is under pressure. It is about grief, resilience, and the decision to keep showing up even when the weight of everything makes walking away feel tempting. It is about the quiet, lasting impact of a person who never chased fame but built something far more enduring, the trust, admiration, and inspiration of millions of people who watched him work and decided, because of him, that they could build something too.